You're listening to NYC Radio Live. David Ellenbogen here. I'm thrilled to be speaking with Jeremiah Chiu. He's a visual artist, a synthesist, an educator, and amongst other great projects, he's 1/5 of one of the most exciting improvisational bands out there right now, SML. So thanks for taking the time. I'm excited to chat.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yeah. So yeah, my into your music was SML, and yeah, to me, it's a really exciting group. It's the things I love about it is it seems like you guys have removed like any of the tropes or the standard kind of idiomatic elements of a lot of, let's say, I mean, most of the group is kind of trained in jazz, but it's just everybody's listening so much. It's so fresh. It's mysterious. So is it as exciting on the inside as it is from the outside?
It really is as exciting, and I'm glad. It's just kind of been amazing to see that it resonates with people. Because I think that we're all we were just sort of mutual fans of each other's work in LA, because you have a little bit of this unique group of people that are participating in many different groups, but it's also just like all five of us are solo artists in our own right. And so it's not often that you have kind of like amongst the five of us so many different groups that we participate in collaboratively in different configurations, in different quantities. So it's been exciting also in the sense that like it's, for me, the most non-traditional group orientation I've ever participated in the sense that like it's all improvised, and we've never rehearsed, and we have barely talked even about just sort of an intention for the music other than bringing ourselves to these performances and finding out what happens kind of like in real time together. So maybe part of the excitement that, an audience gets is that with improvisation, it can sometimes be thrilling, and other times it doesn't hit. There's sort of like a volatility or a vulnerability that is a part of the expression. So it feels exciting for sure. And it's quite fun.
Yeah, it was very interesting to get Booker's take on like what he thought some of the secret ingredients were, and he did bring up the not talking about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, you can. What were his other ingredients? I can.
Yeah, I was almost gonna tell. I thought maybe after you can take a listen
No,
to
it's
our
totally
interview,
fine.
and you'll find it really interesting. But then I didn't want to be the guy that ruins SML because everybody else starts over intellectualizing it.
This results in an immediate text to Booker where I argue with him about what ingredients I think are in SML.
Yeah, no, basically he said his leadership and the fact that you're all under his
thumb. No, but I think that actually, because I was talking to Anna and Josh earlier today about this, because we were also just kind of talking through some of the experience in playing in SML, and this came up a little bit in the sense that we were in the beginning there was kind of like this let's not talk about the music, almost as a way to force ourselves to be hyper present when we were playing, and we already are doing that, but they're sort of like you also don't come into the performance with a preconceived notion that's gonna that kind of puts you in a space where you're getting into your own head, about like what it shouldn't be, versus just really listening and then following where it's going, or helping craft a contrast or a narrative, or kind of pulling in different directions. So not talking about it was really more about forcing a constraint that is just like, well, we have to find it, together. So this is everything from like what key is somebody going to play into any of those other motifs that might occur in terms of energy or spirit of a performance. But as I was talking about this with Josh and Anna today, we came to or I came to a realization, which is like, it's actually not that we don't talk about it. It's that we don't, that the five of us are so adept to being in an environment in which you can immediately hear what somebody's intention is, or like you're responding to them. And that response happens in a way that, you have some exceptionally talented people, like, the rest of SML, that they can actually just like turn on a dime and they can respond. And so that sort of like response in real time is in a lot of ways talking about it, right, without having to talk about it. So not coming into there, you're coming into a performance. The preparation is really just kind of getting into a present state where you're kind of like, I'm ready to go wherever anyone wants to go. And none of us are really the kind of people that are like, this is what I have in mind for tonight. You're going to follow me. It's more kind of like, how are we speaking to each other in the moment, and what happens when you have five people in conversation versus two,
Yeah, that openness is a very interesting element, because I would think as a synthesist, you don't necessarily know like exactly what sound is gonna come out, right? I mean,
sort of do.
do?
Yeah, I mean, like I have like a palette that I work within in the modular rig that I'm using. There's definitely ways to approach it, and I think like for me that really was the interesting sort of vehicle in terms of like coming into working in an improvised setting, which is like you don't see a whole lot of this instrument in that environment. And so then it forced me to create like a toolkit or an instrument that feels sort of like I can really dial something in the moment and feel very comfortable within the constraints of like this box, this modular synth. So I don't know sort of like exactly what's going to come out, but I do have a pretty good sense of how to get there and how to respond to it quickly and then to pivot it, which is also why my approach to this has also incorporated a lot of live sampling, in addition to sort of like sequence generation or tonal things or sort of percussive things.
Right. Well, that's what I was thinking, particularly that with a live sample, if you're holding a mic past some cymbals or past getting some room sound in the immediate moment, yeah, you're going to have to respond to what's coming out and dial it in. Yeah.
Yeah. That's been really fun. There's like I've played a couple different approaches to it where I like the way that I do it now is so kind of lo-fi, which is basically like holding a microphone and catching things as I point at them. And then the way that I'm recording them there's a couple different samplers or ways to process that, either in a more traditional sort of like reel-to-reel style loop or tape capture, to something that's more like a granular sampling mechanism, where it kind of generates new material as you input things. So I like the kind of basicness of how to capture those sounds in there, because then it kind of versus getting a direct feed from anyone, it creates a little bit more like a music concrete, approach to this, where you're just kind of catching the field of sound, and then having different frequencies or different resonances appear that you might not have caught if you were getting a direct line, because things bleed, things overlap, things feed back a little bit, and it just feels a little bit more chaotic in the best way.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. Because so like because I obviously like in your music from the Island Islands, is that the right pronunciation?
Holland.
There's, how is it? How do you say it?
Holland.
Orlando. Yeah. So I mean, you hear I mean, there's a lot of wind and feel,
Mm.
you know, and it sounded a lot like rocks or pebbles, which were getting very close to the sound of like an analog pop on a record or something like that.
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um, so yeah, I mean, it seems like that's actually a similar thing that Booker was saying in terms of like um getting, because do you know his father was like super into
Mhm.
Harry Partch and all
Oh yeah,
that whole,
absolutely.
yeah. So Harry Partch's whole thing was one element of his music was, I think, he went really deep into just intonation music and created these, you know, and got very, very mathy. And Booker's kind of rebelled against that a little bit, and he's more like, now he's more about like, even, you know, I was asking about polyrhythms, and he said something very beautiful. He was like, yeah, the polyrhythms I'm like more interested are like the polyrhythms the rain makes,
Mhm.
you know. So there's this natural randomness that creates its own overtone system and its own, yeah, and that seems to be part of what you
Yeah,
guys are about.
yeah, exactly. I think that there's some levels of like, Booker and we kind of met in the like LA experimental music scene where uh, we both just had found each other as people that were interested in like exploring sort of like uh, the realms of like creating these either generative or chance or improvised scenarios with experimental music that I don't feel for myself was overly academic,
Mm,
but more of a way of like I actually am trying to bring in all these different influences from the things that I love that sometimes are more melodic, that are more uh, song oriented or structured or completely improvised, but you just kind of create your own palette in this world and learn how um, to dial in your own toolkit of texture, of dynamics, of tone and palette, and and just play within that, and it keeps just sort of growing and evolving and changing over time. So I think Booker and I found some nice synergy working together early, or before, prior to SML, for a few years on just different. Our headspaces in music were very similar, at the
yeah.
time. So,
And then in terms of your process of making an album, once you guys do all these live improvisations, then there's a second layer of kind of cutting up the tape and creating something else, right? How's that all working?
yeah, I think that that's for a couple different reasons. I think that like once again, the experience for SML, the experience of a live performance and the album experience are distinct from each other in the sense that you know, we did intend not to just like when we heard those first recordings, we had four, sets of material or more, and rather than just being like, here's this unedited live takes of stuff, what can we actually form out of the constraints of what we do have, which were just stereo bounces from the tape. And it was a way to kind of collapse the music onto itself in a way that started to form these really beautiful, also it's like chance editing approaches, so you are being a little experimental with like the editing of the music as you are with the performance of it, and they generate sort of a new expression that I think otherwise if you're sitting there kind of like conjuring something from the ground up and trying to write a type of tune or something, that's just not what SML is from the onset. So
Yeah, that's another thing that makes it have a very fresh sound to me as a listener, because it's like, it's not like it's 8 bars and then a cut, and or you know, or and that it's, there aren't expected harmonic changes or anything like that, and that yeah, that just keeps it really like a fresh experience.
yeah, I mean, we also have like, five people very adept at producing their own approach to of uh or having their own approach to music production. And so you have all these different ideas and different ways to manipulate the existing thing that I'm like, there's enough variables here to create sort of a synergy of interesting overlap.
Yeah, and I saw some interview with Jimmy Page, and he was like laughing, saying like, of course, if you take 2 years to make an album, the music will be stale. He was like, we made Led Zeppelin 4 in 2 weeks, or something like that. So I think there's that too, right? Because you guys, I mean, that first album, you got the 2 track and that's it. And now you're gonna cut it up and make something, and you're capturing energy, actually. It's not
Yeah.
just sound.
I think, yeah, that's also been like a nice constraint or framework, which is just like, we record not in the studio, we don't rehearse, we record live when we perform, and then we work with those. So, on the second record, you saw is just like, now we have another variable, which is like what happens when you do have multi-track recordings and you do have a couple more shows. How does that shift our approach? Or our like ability to manifest a song out of something. And it definitely changed things because you do have a lot more ability to kind of dial in specificity, right? So you can mute certain things now for the first time. The obvious difference in there is there's still like a handful of takes on that record that are just, you hear what happened. And I remember reading some reviews on the first record where there was a little bit of like, oh, well, they did this post. It was post edited here, and you can definitely hear this like overlap of stuff. And I just remember being like, that was just exactly what happened. There was no edits on this one. And that's quite fun to me, this sort of like inherent mystery of how all this stuff is made, because, on paper, you have drums, bass, sax, guitar, and synthesizer. And so one might assume that like the synthetic sounds are all coming from me, but it's just like so far from the truth, because, everyone has the ability to generate a really diverse range of sounds and also manipulate their instrument in ways that you might not expect. And so some of that like compositional complexity is happening in real time. And that's what I think is like fun about the live show versus the recording, is it's like you come to the live show, you kind of get a little bit more of like the understanding of how chaotic or how complex or like some of the stuff really is just like, that's what happened and that's what's on the tape.
Yeah, and also it's the big mystery, like, is who's playing what, because yeah. And Booker even said, yeah, a lot of times I have no idea. Is it Jeremiah? Is it Gregory? Is it
that is something that's true. Just full stop. And we often are digging back into the tape and being like, okay, I now realize that Greg has always some amazing mysterious sound that's coming out from the guitar that I had no idea he could make. It's quite fun.
So how did this all come to, like, how did you become a synthesist? How did that, like, when did you start getting involved with these instruments?
Quite a long time ago at this point. I grew up playing piano and violin, and then in high school started being in like bands, playing guitar, bass, and then eventually keyboards or synthesizer. But those, it was at the time, it was just like, you're in punk bands, you're in emo bands, you're kind of like playing just in any, which I learned later that I was like, the rest of SML was like, they were in jazz band and like went to jazz camp. And I was like, I didn't have that, but I wish I would have. But it just comes from a different. I had a different experience. So synthesizers became kind of just like one of the things that were percolating up at the time, because I was in Chicago, at a time in which Chicago house and techno, Detroit techno, and all these things were coming into our world very locally. And so you also had access to all these instruments because nobody wanted them at that time, so it's like there were drum machines, there were synthesizers around that you could kind of get that today are just like absorbently expensive. But the group of friends that I was making music with and the people that I was around, like we were heavily influenced by all sort of range of music, but synthesizers ended up being this thing that we were like buying and trading because you could get them so cheaply that you could basically test something out, play with it. If it doesn't resonate with you, you kind of like trade it for another one. And it gave us kind of like it gave me like a real opportunity to uh, interface with a lot of different synthesis techniques, very quickly, and without it being like today, it just would cost an enormous amount of money to do something like that. So it was quite amazing, quite
Yeah.
fun.
So what years were you talking about?
This is like 2000, 2004,
Mm-hmm.
and beyond. It's kind of like at that time also you had, the great bands in Chicago like Tortoise and Sea and Cake and Jim O'Rourke and Chicago Underground, everything. And all of those bands really highly influenced our approach because they were they were just hipping us to a ton of different kinds of music that really kind of opened up my world. Because you kind of like, what you know, and you're just kind of until you learn how to research and dig for music, you're kind of just given stuff and or
Mm-hmm.
not, right? And so when we started to find all these musicians in Chicago that were kind of very they were very open about their influences or what they're listening to, almost in a way that's kind of like, oh, you have to know this, you got to get hip to this thing. It really just expanded my world infinitely, where you know you started to go from like what I know is electronic music like Aphex Twin and local punk bands, and now I'm like deeply into Electric Miles, and like, and then once you're in Electric Miles, it kind of like the world opens up, and all the minimalist composers, and Tropicalia and Brazilian music and YMO and stuff like that. It's just kind of like it all just kind of exploded, where you started to connect the dots that there was just like a huge musical universe out there that wasn't just what was right in front of you, in your local community. So
Yeah. No, and it's kind of beautiful that it's uh, that in this day and age where, they say the world is flat or whatever, but Chicago still now, but it's definitely then it had this built-in culture that goes all the way back to the
yeah,
ACM and Sun Ra was set up there for a while, and all that history of doing its own thing. And um it's you could be in New Orleans and you have a different thing, or you guys are in LA and you're doing your own. It's
I
got.
do feel like at the end of the day, like so many of us are Chicagoans, I still feel the spirit of that
Mhm.
very much in the sense that what you just said, which is like we're doing our own thing, because it was kind of like a important part of being a musician in Chicago is doing your own thing, kind of like finding in the community how to uh, develop your own voice, or experiment with a hybrid of different approaches to the music. And it's not as easy as choosing a thing and saying like, this is my genre that I like and this is the band that it was just like way more open and um hybrid, in that nature.
Yeah, and there was like a cool sound that was coming out then that was like particular to that time and place. How those whatever Sea and Cake records or Jim O'Rourke records
Yeah,
sounded, and it just yeah, it was something was happening, which
for
is
sure.
which is a nice feeling.
It's still happening,
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So that's cool. So you kind of you launched out of Chicago and your brain got opened up and you discovered Tropicalia
Yeah.
and Miles and all that kind of stuff. And then you you made your way to LA. So was that the next stop?
Yeah, so I was playing in bands in Chicago. I kind of like yeah, at the time there was this great space called Shape Shop, which was formerly Truck Stop, and those were kind of like it was like near South Side, just south, like just past the South Loop of Chicago. Um, and it was kind of a hub for a while for a lot of the jazz musicians. They kind of there was like it was right around the corner from the Velvet Lounge, and I think a handful of people that I'm not exactly sure who were running Truck Stop, which then eventually became Shape Shop, and it was basically just like a communal recording studio in the sense that there was a handful of people that were living in the space, but they basically built a small recording studio. And then I was playing in this group called Icy Demons that was kind of a blend of like you had Griffin Rodriguez, who was a bass player and singer and songwriter, was very much tapped into a scene like, and he knew Jeff Parker and Josh Abrams and Tamika Reed, and like that was sort of his community as well, but was forging this like really beautiful, uh, you know, I guess like art pop band with Chris Powell, who was in Need New Body and Man Man out in Philadelphia. And so there was just a little bit of this. Shape Shop became a hub where bands were, making records and learning how to be bands in Chicago. But there was also just like that was one micro, it was like one bubble of many of these bubbles across Chicago, much beyond my, early, preceding my time is participating in that, but continues today, right? There's still just like all these little pockets of people making things happen in their communities, and just like forging collaborative shows out there, and it makes up this beautiful fabric that is Chicago's musical landscape. So when I moved to LA, it was in 2014, and it was really just and by no other reason than, I think as a Chicagoan, you're kind of like you have to make a decision if you're gonna stay or you're gonna go. and and both options are great, and moving to LA was just I was working a lot as a graphic designer. I still am, and it was just kind of like, let's move to a bigger city. At that time, a lot of the design work I was doing was less tethered to like the city of Chicago in specific. So it was just another way, just another opportunity to just try something different and see if it was going to work. And also, I was just kind of leaning a little bit harder into like a personal artistic practice. And LA just felt like a nice place to land because the city felt very uh like it felt like it was transforming a little bit when I landed here. Like things didn't feel so situated. In Chicago, there are sort of like these institutions of creative music and art that really have an incredible legacy. And LA, you see that as well, but kind of in slightly different realms when I first arrived here, because this was probably coming in um, just following like the close of like low end theory, and the
Mhm.
beat scene. Obviously, there's just like a history of like West Coast jazz and etc. But like there wasn't like what we when I first moved here was seeking out was like where is the Chicago sort of free jazz and improvised music and experimental music scenes here, and it didn't feel as like cemented or like even formalized as it might be today. Um, so it felt like there was some room to just participate in building a different community out here, which was fun.
Yeah. I mean, I get that. It's like it seems like the fun and the community is a big part of like what's in it for you, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Just go. I mean, I love going to shows. I love seeing music and seeing art and participating in that way where you get to support the local people's ideas. It's great.
yeah. And do you feel like you took like did it take a while for you to find your your like voice as a artist?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's still like an ever-changing thing. I think that like in Chicago, I was oftentimes in a band as kind of like one member or like more of a I guess what you would call a side person in the group, right? It's like you're kind of playing in bands that were super amazing and fun, but they weren't like your conception or your vision entirely. Um, and I think that like helps you understand how to operate in that dynamic, and it teaches you a lot about like how to uh, also discover what you want out of your own artistic practice and what your voice is as a as a maker. So moving out here did allow me to spend a little bit more time focused on developing and honing in my own craft as a synthesist and an artist, and I think it was probably it took a long time. It still is a work in
Yeah,
progress, you know.
because like I mean, maybe you won't agree, but like I feel like synthesizers are it's almost a dangerous weapon. Like in the wrong hands, it can be so tacky, And there's a lot of like not great music made, or you go to the dentist office and it's like a bansuri and someone pressing one key on a keyboard.
Yeah.
But like really, I mean, across all your albums, like it's very consistently like to me it's all like it's great music. It has like a really interesting effect, which we could talk about later. But I mean, I'm curious, like I mean, a few questions are bubbling up, but like I guess number one is, do you feel like you have to be in a certain like mental state on the inside to create certain sounds on the outside?
No, not at
No.
all. I think that is the creative practice a little bit that you. I want to zoom out for 1 second though, and because I think that it took me a long time to learn this too. But your thoughts on like the dentist office music, and it took me a long time to recognize them. Like I don't know if I should qualify these things as bad. They're just not for me.
Well,
Not the
and
audience.
it's actually very true because um, what I think happened is like sometimes when you grow up at a certain time, you get negative associations to
For sure.
things. And so because you've heard something else, like because maybe later on in life, a lot of maybe just purely commercial oriented, literally commercial
Yeah.
oriented people might have used a certain tone. And then you hear that
Oh
tone,
yeah.
but really like when Chick Corea used it originally, it was the hippest thing alive. And when you meet people from that generation, they love that. And you're like, how could you? So yeah, I mean, I do agree that it's all just sound, and
Yeah.
like
Sure.
we're the ones that put it in a box. Uh, but but at the same time, you're making some choices, and you must say, hey, I'm gonna leave this one on the editing room floor, right? Like,
Yeah. I mean, well, so yeah. So to answer the question, I think that like, um, I actually just finished a another solo record, literally, in the last couple weeks. And this one happened quite quickly. It happened basically from inception in beginning of February until like the end of March. So basically 2 months where, still out there playing SNL shows, doing my, day-to-day work as a graphic designer. But then just like so like finding a way to output a record and write something that felt a little bit different than how I've been working in these other groups, and the process came up a lot for me because I'm really I thrive when there's a deadline. I'm
mm,
a deadlines oriented person, so if you put one in front of me, I usually am like pretty diligent about sort of actioning on it. And so it really it forced me to confront my creative process in the sense that like uh I don't have time anymore to sweat if I'm feeling inspired or not, but
Mm,
instead I learned that like uh part of the activating that creative muscle or space is that it is a daily practice, or it is this sort of like consistency, like any instrument, any language, any of these practices that we think about, which is like in the beginning of that process, I said, I'm trying to just accumulate things. And when I was teaching, I'm always like telling students, and this I think would be applicable to music or anything else too, but usually teaching in a visual realm. But uh, the idea is that like you should separate the process of making from the process of judging, and I
mm.
think that, like so often we conflate those two things where you're kind of making it and immediately judge it, and be like, oh, this isn't good enough. And it's like, well, it's in its infancy, it hasn't had time to become good. So and then you can make anything good, you just have to work through it. So there's like some level of, for me, this kind of like basic practice out of crafting albums where you're kind of like, well, how do I set aside time where it's like, for these 2 weeks I'm just going to generate material without thinking too much about what that needs to be or how it should be, but actually just truly trying to be creative, and conjure things from thin air. And what that ends up actually feeling like is you're in there and you'll have a day where you're like, oh, yes, I'm in there. I'm in the pocket, and something has come out and I've written a song in like 2 hours, start to finish. And then there are other days where you're like, I told myself I'm going to do this and I just am not in the mood to do it, but I'm going to sit down. And you just sit there and you kind of like bang your head against the wall all night long, and you feel like nothing netted from it. But oftentimes you come back to that and you're like, oh, now that I've had a moment of space, I hear the nuggets here, and I can like totally take these and form them into something. So to me, it is really this uh, process of making things where you're kind of like, I'm not waiting for inspiration to strike anymore as much as I am just trying to be a little bit more diligent and patient, that like if you put the work in, like the results will show.
That is seriously that should be broadcast off the top of every building, actually, because even if you're not an artist, or someone told you you're not, or whatever, I mean, that's such an amazing, you know it's for anything, right? I mean, it's just like the just making a habit of whatever the hell the thing is. If you did it every day, uh,
Yeah, exactly. You sort of like, it works itself out when you really want it and focus on it and put the energy and spirit towards it. It's sort of like, it sort of does the work itself. And I actually like prefer, I think most people would probably agree. It's like you kind of prefer, uh, when you look at a work that you've made, or you see something, you're just like, oh yeah, like this was hard work. Like this took
mm.
something to get, versus being like, well, this took very little work and it's amazing, like I've just conjured. Yeah. It's like that. There's some value, I think everyone holds to some level of hard work. I don't think that like it necessitates or qualifies that amount of work input equals value of output. But I do think that there's just something of like, you kind of push yourself. And I remember in this process of making this record, that like hasn't been doesn't have a date yet, but eventually it will be out there. But I remember in making this, I was talking to another friend and musician and amazing composer, Ben Babbitt, and we were just talking about that creative process too. And he was like, it's quite hard because what you're trying to do is see beyond your vision. So you're always trying, like when you're making these things, you're pushing yourself to like see beyond what you're able to currently see. And I'm like, that's quite profound, because it is uh kind of an impossibility, right? You're pushing yourself beyond your current means to hopefully result in something new for yourself, right? So
Mm.
it's a way to kind of spawn or generate a new idea or activate a new approach in your process, which is like continually trying to see over the horizon, which is, a lot of work.
Yeah, the mental image I was getting when you're speaking earlier was almost like of time and then a chisel.
Yeah.
Um, and yeah, you're working away at it. And then, yeah, and then the other image visually, I mean, maybe because you're a visual artist, but yeah, everybody is in this, uh, I guess we're all in this, in some level of construct and at all times, right?
Right.
And to see out of Plato's cave, like,
Yeah.
how do you get there? You're either gonna break something that you break an assumption, or I don't know. Do you have Brian Eno's deck? Do you know
Oh
that deck?
yeah, strategies.
Yeah, or pull one of those cards. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's
I like that image. The chisel is a great metaphor because I also find that this is something that happens with artists a lot too, myself included, which is like if you use the analogy of a block, uh, a stone that you're chiseling away at over the course of time. The hardest part is knowing when to stop. Because if you keep going, you basically chisel it completely into dust and then nothing is left there, right? And like that has happened so many times where you just keep working and working and overworking it. And it's just like now it's completely gone. So kind of like learning that finesse of like when to just call it and always know that like sure it could continue to be worked on, but for right now this feels like it's resting place. And
yeah. So I mean, literally, I don't have many questions written down. I usually don't write down questions, but I did write down. How do you know when you're finished?
yeah,
That is a tricky one, right?
it's very tricky for sure. I mean, like sometimes for me, I'm okay letting go of things,
Mhm.
because uh at the end of the day, like I want to be, I want to kind of like continue to make
Mhm.
records, make works, and I don't see when I'm working on a single piece, you're always trying to give it your best effort, but I don't see these things as like they need to be the end all be all of like my grand statement every time. And so it allows me to have a little bit more of like a what I feel is maybe a like a ability to let go and not be overly precious about the work every time. And so there's kind of a looseness to it that I think that people can hear, that it isn't sort of like overly perfected or dialed, but there's just some level of like, well, that's kind of what happened, and that's I think has a nice resonance on its own. Um, and so yeah, I kind of feel sometimes I let go of things too early and I'm like, well, that's the song, I don't want to work on it anymore, so it's done. Or there are other times where it's like, okay, I can kind of like find a place where I feel like I've addressed the things I want to, and this is kind of the best it can be. And rather than trying to make this the best thing I've ever made, it's the best thing that it can be, and I'm going to let go of that and move on to the next thing. And that doesn't sort of like devalue that piece. It's just sort of like that's that study or that's that expression uh, in form now, and let's make another thing. So I kind of want to keep making stuff, and that's more my goal.
Yeah, because I mean, it would hold up the whole factory line if you're just stuck on one thing, right? Um,
But it's very easy to get stuck, and I understand why, because there's a lot of when you put yourself out there, it's very vulnerable. So there's a lot of fear of how it gets received, or and you're not able to, when you put these things out into the public sphere, there's so much ability to have it be scrutinized. You kind of like are letting people
Mm.
experience a thing, and you can't control their reaction, right? So you always want it to kind of have an expression that feels like it best represents you. And what I learned is like, or what I'm learning and understanding more these days is like, I remember working on a project with a professor at some time, and I was making this like video, and he was like, you have this ability to make stuff, and but what you keep doing is you try to put everything into it, always. And he's like, rather than trying to say everything, just try to say something. I was like, oh yeah, that's quite nice, because then it opens it up where actually being specific tethers to the general, right? It tethers to the universal, um, because you're focused now in something that someone else can resonate with. What that particular story or word or poem or idea is, the nugget of it, it doesn't live in a vacuum. It lives in the world, right? And so I think that that kind of tether feels quite nice. And so with all of these songs or these works, I kind of see them a little bit now as part of this larger narrative or larger body of work, where nobody's going to hear one song and let's say they don't resonate with the one song I made. They're not like, well, this person is bad now. All of a sudden, like they don't, all of my weight doesn't exist on one kernel, but maybe they can kind of see the overall breadth of work and actually see that there's some exploration, there's some dynamics, there's some complexity to it. So I'm not as concerned anymore with the singular, because I understand it tethering to the multiple.
That's really interesting. And I think that uh that that direction can really get in the way of things. Like by definition, most manifestos are terrible because they're trying to tell you the entire universe, and they're, it's or whatever. And a haiku
Yeah,
is mentioning a frog plopping into the water, and it's
right.
it's reflect it's like,
Right.
capturing everything.
Well, yeah. I mean, I think of like what's interesting about manifestos is how they get read. Because if we understand them, I think oftentimes we see them as kind of like this, like it's a dogma. It's sort of like absolute in its truth, but like I always find them to be as useful as a rubric, because essentially what it is a framework, or a set of constraints that you can work within. So, like to me, like uh, my modular rig for SML is my manifesto, where it's basically just like, within this box, I can do anything, but I'm kind
Mm,
of just limited to what's in this box.
mm.
So it sort of allows me ultimate uh, freedom to explore within this set of constraints, which is much more creative to me than when you have every synth in the world that I could be using. And it's like, well, then you just get into well, this can't do that, or it can do that, and I wish it could do this. And it's like, well, I'm the opposite. Like, this is all this thing can do. So like, how do I be creative within that constraint? And that's, to me, the more fun part um, of the gear.
Yeah, actually, I interviewed some of the guys from Sun Ra's band, and he used to have, he liked paradoxes, so he enjoyed saying that, limitations are freedom.
Yeah, they really are. They absolutely are, because within those limitations, you have the ability to push the boundaries of it.
Mm.
So that I do think is an absolute way that I approach a lot of this stuff, is just kind of like, well, this is kind of what I know, or what this tool can do, and they're just tools for expression. So it's not telling me how to express. I have to find that.
All right. So what if we turned it on its head and you had the opposite problem,
Hmm.
and some gentleman comes off of his private jet with a briefcase and he says, like, Mr. Chu, I'd like to fund 2 years of your unlimited creative expression, tell me what you'd have in mind. Like,
That's great. I've never been asked this question before. I guess like the first thing I might do, uh, and this is like you're talking no bounds, right? That's
sure.
just like
Yeah, yeah.
do what you want with this briefcase of money, right?
Yeah.
So then, like, I would probably, as a mode of artistic work, look at how far I can have that money carry me, so that 2 years becomes 20 years. You know,
Well, that might be cheating. Let's say,
I
I
don't
mean, that's
know.
a great answer, and that's probably the most honest thing. But if someone said like, hey, and it's not, I'm not saying feed the world or whatever, but like as an artist, like we want you to create an opus. Like
Yeah.
you can have an orchestra, you can have all the ballet dancers you want, what you have any, like, would you have a grand idea if someone was like,
I would probably spend time trying to form a list of questions that I want to answer, and then I would explore those questions, in different ways. And um, whenever, like with design, I often, am working a little bit in like service of other people's businesses and other people's ideas, and helping them formalize, visually formalize a system to express what they're trying to accomplish. But so often, my starting point is to locate some definitions. Like what are the bounds of, like, literally, what are you trying to achieve here? So if the goal is opus, I'll do this with you right now. If you asked me to make an opus, and my first move would basically to be looking up the definition of what an opus is. And as I'm looking this up, it basically says an opus is a creative work, most commonly a musical composition, art piece, or literary work. It's often used to designate a specific number assigned. Oh, so it's actually about the number within the work. So this is quite interesting too. It says the Latin word meaning a result of a work. So you're asking me to make an opus. You're actually just asking me to make a work, and one in a volume, one in a series. And so I can do that easily. You can then
been
decide.
doing it?
Yeah, you can then decide if you want to call it opus or not. I can also decide that too. It doesn't mean it will be good, but it'll be one amongst many more opi.
Well, cool, man. Well, this was super fun chatting. Maybe before we go, I mean, I should definitely just mention that, the amazing albums that you've been making with Marta Sofina Honer, and especially you got that the closest things to silence with
Yeah,
Ariel
yeah.
Kalma. I mean, he had a vibe, right?
Oh, he was an incredible person to collaborate with. A real dream come true. It was so sad that that he had passed last year. But it was an absolute honor to work with him, as he'd been quite an inspiration to our practices and our work, just from all the amazing music that he had created in his lifetime as well.
Yeah, and the stuff that you do with, I mean, Marta, there's such a simpatico between you, and somehow the viola works really well.
People are always so surprised by it, and I'm like, well, they're both like, viola's beautiful timbre, so it's like,
Yeah.
most things probably work well with it. That's actually that's what you want on your stuff. Put more viola in music.
Right, right. Yeah, but almost like, yeah, rather than a violin, which might cut a little more, like the more mid-range sound of the viola, like works so well with the synthesizer, and when she's making the harmonies, and but yeah, so it seems like you're having fun. Seems like you're in a,
That's all we can try to do, right?
yeah.
Continue to make work and feel just completely grateful for the the privilege of being able to make work right now and kind of just participate in all these really vibrant communities and musicians and artists all over the world. So it's just like, it feels just super special. And I'm trying not to take any of that for granted and just like put my head down and work as hard as I can to maintain it, because it really does all feel like quite a dream. And I'm having a great time doing it.
Yeah, well, you're chiseling.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, thanks, man. Appreciate the time.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me. It was a real pleasure to chat with you, and looking forward to hearing it all.